Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I will be discussing 5 surprising things my DNA test results got wrong or I just didn't expect. This type of video will be kind of personal, slightly surprising, and kind of relatable, meaning a lot of people expect exact answers from DNA, and that doesn't necessarily what happens. And I will naturally teach how DNA actually works. Before I get into this video, if you noticed my new background for this video, and I'm just going to use this background because I thought it was pretty relatable to the video. And as you can see, Ancestry has my 100th trait. So you might see that quite a bit. But yeah, so before we get into this video, I just want to say thank you all for the subscribers and viewership. And if you like this video, make sure to like, hype, share, and subscribe. And make sure to comment down some video ideas you have or you want me to do in the future. So let's get into it. Hi everyone, and today I want to talk about something kind of surprising. 5 things my DNA test results didn't show the way I expected, or things I learned that really changed how I understand my ancestry. Because DNA testing is amazing, but it doesn't always give the full picture people really think it does. Number 1, DNA doesn't show every ethnicity you expect. So one thing I learned is that even if you know you have ancestry from a certain place, it might not show up strongly in your results from a variety of reasons. Number 1, you're not as much, your grandparents aren't as much of that as you expected, or parents or whatever. Number 2, you discover a grandparent or a parent isn't actually your real parent and somebody else is. Number 3, it's inherited randomly, so even if your family is like somehow 100% English, it's random inheritance, and you just might not get as much of that and be in other regions. And coinciding with that, number 4, they might link your DNA to a different region because that's where their reference populations are, and that's where your DNA is matching with overall. And what are reference populations? Reference populations are basically populations of people in certain areas that DNA testing or autosomal DNA companies take, and it's people who can trace their ancestors on the paper trail for sure down that same region thousands of years, if not hundreds of years. Some places have more higher reference populations, some have lower. So lower confidence regions are usually like South America, Africa, maybe like the Eastern Asia, Western North America. And more higher confidence are usually Europe, Asia, and North America, kind of. So, yeah. And those are many of the few reasons why DNA inheritance, because DNA inheritance is so random and one person isn't usually 100% of something, which if you are, that's kind of crazy and kind of cool, and you'll probably be in the reference population for that. But yeah, so, and like I said, if you get like 1% West Asian, that might disappear because it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's a very lower percentage, so that means they have less confidence that you can trace an ancestor back. Or you can trace an ancestor back yourself. Which leads to point number 2. You don't inherit exactly 50% of your DNA from each ancestor evenly. Meaning you don't exactly inherit 25% from your grandparents and 12.5% from your great-grandparents and 6.25% from your great-great-grandparents. I used to think DNA was evenly split from every ancestor, but that's not quite how that works. You can inherit more from one line of your family than another, even if they're both equally distant. So, because of DNA random inheritance, it's about 25%, but you don't exactly inherit a 25% from each grandparent. I can even use this as an example. My grandma and I, according to Ancestry, only share about 21% DNA, which means that I share more DNA with one relative than another. But if I trace farther back, maybe I share like 6.5% of my DNA with one of her parents. And I share a lower amount with one of my other grandparents that I share a higher amount of percentage with their parents. So DNA inheritance is totally random. The only thing that's exact is you inherit exactly a random 50% chunk from mom and a random 50% chunk from dad. Everything else is just around 25%, around 12.5%, around 6.25%. So yeah, that means ancestors can show up more in your DNA than others. So some ancestors can show up a lot higher in your DNA than others. And sometimes those ancestors that don't show up high in your DNA can show up higher in your siblings' DNA. So it's very just depends on what you inherited and stuff like that. Which leads me to point 3. Some matches are closer than you seem. I also learned that DNA matches can look confusing at first. Someone might show up as a distant cousin, but they could actually be connected to a very important branch of your family tree. So I never judge a match just by its label. I always check in how they connect. So just because Ancestry uses a predictor tool. So based on how much DNA you share with that person, it will predict the relationship. So a half-second cousin 3 times removed doesn't mean that's your half-second cousin 3 times removed. It can be in situation, especially if it's a closer relative, but the relationships I actually find to be kind of inaccurate because it said my grandmother was my aunt, and I obviously know that's my grandmother. So you'll just have to go down that family tree paper trail and really find it out. So DNA matches, the DNA you share and the centimorgans you share are correct, but the relationship that Ancestry gives you or MyHeritage gives you doesn't mean that's a relationship. To really find those relationships, you gotta go down the rabbit hole. And I think this is something that a lot of autosomal DNA test companies don't really address, is that it's just predicting. So if you really want to know your DNA matches, that also could help you with a brick wall, then you have to go down that paper trail. Which leads me to point number 4. DNA doesn't always match the paper trail perfectly. One of the biggest surprises is that DNA and records don't always align up perfectly. You might find a paper record saying one thing, but DNA suggests a slightly different story or a missing connection you didn't expect. That's why you always need both DNA and records together. 2 things I want to know. It depends on what you're looking at for DNA. So your papers in that record, like I mentioned in other videos, you might find a record that says Jane Doe, born April 10th, 1810 in Massachusetts, USA. But you might find another Jane Doe, and you really just have to look at those records, and that sometimes is where DNA doesn't match the paper trail. Number 2, if you get really broad DNA regions and not a lot of matches, or a lot of your matches are distant cousins, that also might help not align up as much with the paper trail as well. So sometimes distant cousins don't really help in that sense. So finding grandparents, so yeah. What you can do to make this a little easier is make sure when you're accepting records to check maybe with a relative to be like, and make sure they say, okay, yeah, that's actually the ancestor and stuff. Number 2, make sure that they have the same birthday, the same marriage, the same death, the same brown hair and blue eyes described in the record that your grandma told you. And make sure you just have to double check all this. DNA is, the regions give you a broad view, but just because your ancestor says Czech Republic and you don't have Czech Republic in your DNA doesn't mean you're not Czech Republic. It's just you didn't inherit that, or it just didn't show up for some reason in your DNA results. So just make sure to look at the paper when you're going the paper trail. Check with DNA, but don't take it for granted. And same goes for DNA. When you're using DNA to, well, actually, I just said this. When you're use DNA to help you go down the paper trail. Make sure what you know about your DNA and your DNA test results say somewhat or almost or exactly match up with your paper trail. Which leads me to my last point. Ethnicity results can change over time. Another thing I learned is that ethnicity estimates aren't permanent. They can update as companies improve their reference data. So your results today might look a little different in the future. And when I mean a little different, I mean really different. Ethnicity companies are constantly updating their reference populations and getting more and more granular with their population markers. So you might see that 50% Western Asian go down to 32% Iraqi, and whatever the other percentage to, or no, and 18% Afghanistan, or something along that lines. Or you might see that 70% Norwegian go down to only 30% Norwegian. Ethnicity results, when you get them, are literally the most oldest. So they just keep improving over time. That's why you really have to go down that paper trail when you're looking at your DNA test results. Or when you're building your family tree and finding where they're from. Because your ethnicity results change over time, and you might not inherit every little region that your ancestors are from. So that's the really big picture. Alright, so that, I guess, brings us to the end of this video. So overall, DNA testing is powerful, but it's not a perfect map. It's more like clues that you have to piece together. But if you need me to do a part 2 where I explain even more in depth these mistakes, or the biggest mistakes beginners make when reading DNA results, or how I organize my DNA matches, make sure to comment that down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. And make sure to like, hype, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and comment more video ideas.